Hi everyone. The counseling scenario that I will be discussing is as follows. I am a counselor working at a private practice during the week, and on the weekends I work part-time at a local math tutoring center. None of my clients know that I also work at the tutoring center, and the center does not post tutor personal information online. I have been seeing a client named Joe for several months. Joe is 18 years old and had decided to attend counseling because he was struggling with transitioning out of high school since most of his friends had decided to go to college while he chose to stay home and work to help support his family. Joe was a good student up until his final year of high school, when he made the difficult decision not to apply to any colleges or universities. Since attending counseling, his family has become more financially stable, and he has decided to start studying for the SATs so that he can apply to schools. This is a major improvement for Joe and undoubtedly a step in the right direction towards achieving his goal of attending college. As I am working a shift at the math tutoring center, Joe walks in and I am assigned as his tutor for a 30-minute session. The tutoring center does not inform clients about who their tutor is until their session, and the tutors receive clients on a rolling basis unless requested by a client, so there is no way that Joe or I could have expected this to happen. This is now an ethical dilemma as I am engaging in a dual relationship with my client. I ask myself, is this okay? I will be utilizing the relational ethical decision-making model to resolve this ethical dilemma. I specifically chose this model because I think it's extremely important for me to include my client in the decision-making process, and this model supports that view. The relational ethical decision-making model is comprised of 12 steps, and they are as follows. Step 1. Continually examine the role that ethics play within the therapeutic relationship. Step 2. Identify the ethical dilemma or problem, including various contextual layers, cultural considerations, and ethical ambiguity, seeking consultation and supervision as warranted. Step 3. Discuss with the client the professional and ethical obligations of the counselors and the ethical dilemma, and address how the dilemma impacts the counseling relationship. Step 4. Working with the client, examine the core ethical principles that are most prominent within this ethical dilemma. Step 5. Consider the ethical dilemma, including perceptions, values, biases, and beliefs from both the counselor's and client's points of view. Step 6. Examine how boundaries within the therapeutic relationship are impacted as a result of the ethical conundrum, including the counselor's and client's affective and cognitive domains. Step 7. Look into applicable laws, campus, agency, or department regulations, policies, procedures, handbooks, websites, and so on that may inform your decision. Step 8. Consult professional literature as well as professional colleagues and experts with client consent regarding best practices in similar ethical dilemmas. Step 9. Collaborate with the client in brainstorming potential resolutions to the dilemma and evaluate possible consequences and outcomes of action or inaction. Step 10. Choose a course of action, working through any challenges that may exist within the therapeutic relationship about the ethical issue. Step 11. Implement a selected course of action, addressing client concerns in a mutually supportive environment. And finally, Step 12. Evaluate how the ethical decision will impact the counseling relationship currently, as well as in the future. Let's begin walking through the 12 steps to solve this ethical dilemma. If you recall, Step 1 says to continually examine the role that ethics play within the therapeutic relationship. This step emphasizes the counselor's ability to be an ethically sensitive counselor, as this is vital to a positive therapeutic relationship. In this scenario, I recognize that this unforeseen circumstance is an ethical issue and that it needs to be addressed in order to continue the therapeutic relationship. Step 2 says to identify the ethical dilemma or problem, including various contextual layers, cultural considerations, etc. The ethical dilemma that is occurring pertains to dual relationships. In the moment that I realize that Joe is now my tutoring client, I know that I don't have time to contact my supervisor and seek consultation. However, I recognize that I need to seek consultation after I have my next counseling session with Joe to get a second opinion on the ethical dilemma at hand. Step 3 said to discuss with the client the professional and ethical obligations of counselors, and the ethical dilemma and address how the dilemma impacts the counseling relationship. So involving Joe in addressing the ethical dilemma is an important stage of the relational ethical decision-making model. This scenario is slightly complex in the sense that neither Joe nor I were expecting to see one another at the math center. When Joe sits down in my cubicle to begin the tutoring session, I open up a short discussion about the ethical dilemma and explain the ethical obligations that counselors have, specifically with dual relationships. I do not want to reduce the time that Joe has paid for tutoring by discussing the counseling ethical dilemma, so I asked Joe if he is okay with continuing this conversation during our next counseling session. He agrees, and we finish the tutoring session and reconvene the following week. Step 4 said to working with the client, examine the core ethical principles that are most prominent within this ethical dilemma. At our next counseling session, I discussed the core ethical principles that are the foundation of the counseling profession, but I specifically draw attention to autonomy, non-maleficence, and beneficence with Joe, as these are most in line with the presenting ethical dilemma. I explain my professional obligation to value what my client values, to do no harm to my client, and that I work proactively to benefit my clients. Step 5 said to consider the ethical dilemma, including perceptions, values, biases, etc. During this step, I discussed with Joe my concern that if I continue to be his tutor, that it may negatively affect the therapeutic relationship. I explained that I am really happy with Joe's progress and that I am supportive of Joe in his decision to receive tutoring because it will help him accomplish his goal that he set in the counseling sessions. But I also warn that it can hinder his trust in me if I don't meet his tutoring expectations, and that he or I could become frustrated with one another if we feel that one of us isn't fulfilling our role. Alternatively, I explain how if I continue to be his tutor, it may benefit the therapeutic relationship in that I can see how he's working toward reaching his goal, and I can assist him throughout the process. I asked Joe about his concerns and perceptions about continuing the tutoring sessions with me as his tutor and also as his counselor, and Joe seems uneasy with me being his tutor. Step 6 says to examine how boundaries within the therapeutic relationship are impacted as a result of the ethical conundrum. In this step, I further explain how I take boundary extension and dual relationships very seriously because I care about Joe's progression and the counseling relationship, and the very last thing I would want is for Joe's progress to be hindered from a dual relationship. I asked Joe to further explain his uneasiness with me being his tutor. Step 7 says to look into applicable laws. Joe and I reviewed the ACA Code of Ethics, and we identified that the following codes are most relevant in our decision-making process. Code A.6.b, Extending Counseling Boundaries, which states that counselors take appropriate professional precautions such as informed consent, consultation, supervision, and documentation to ensure that judgment is not impaired and no harm occurs. Code A.6.c, Documenting Boundary Extensions, which states that if counselors extend boundaries as described in A.6a and A.6.b, they must officially document prior to the interaction when feasible the rationale for such an interaction, the potential benefit and anticipated consequences for the client or former client and other individuals significantly involved with the client or former client. And lastly, I.1.b, Ethical Decision Making, which states when counselors are faced with an ethical dilemma, they use and document as appropriate an ethical decision-making model. I also check my staff hiring manual and state laws to make sure that if we did decide to continue tutoring, that there is nothing prohibiting us from doing so. Step 8 says to consult professional literature as well as professional colleagues and experts. With Joe's consent, I seek consultation with my supervisor about the interaction that I had with my client at the tutoring center. I explained to my supervisor that I will include my client in the decision-making process and will seek consultation again if need be. My supervisor is appreciative of my honesty. Step 9 says to collaborate with the client in brainstorming potential resolutions to the dilemma and evaluate possible consequences and outcomes. In this step, Joe and I discuss our options. I can continue counseling Joe and tutoring Joe so long as new informed consent is signed, or I can continue counseling Joe but discontinue tutoring Joe as he can request an alternative tutor at the Math Center. In the second option, I still believe a new informed consent should be drawn up and signed as we will be indirectly seeing one another at the tutoring center. Step 10 says to choose a course of action, working through any challenges that may exist within the therapeutic relationship. Joe and I decide together that it is best that I continue counseling Joe but discontinue being his tutor. We agree that it is most beneficial for Joe to request an alternative tutor at the math center so that the possibility of hindering a therapeutic relationship is diminished. Following our session, I discuss this decision and the reasoning behind the decision with my supervisor and document the decision-making process. Step 11 says, implement a selected course of action, addressing client concerns in a mutually supportive environment. A new informed consent is signed by Joe, and Joe requests a new tutor at the math center. I continue counseling Joe as he works toward his goal of attending college. And finally, step 12 says evaluate how the ethical decision will impact the counseling relationship currently as well as in the future. At our next session, Joe and I discuss how he feels having a new tutor and how our decision to discontinue me as his tutor has impacted the counseling relationship. Joe expresses a sense of relief that he knows the counseling relationship remains as stable as it was, and he looks forward to continue counseling with me. He also explains how he really likes his new tutor and that he feels it is helping him toward reaching his goal of attending college. I explained to Joe that I am glad we made the decision that he is most comfortable with and that I get to continue being his counselor. Some questions to consider. Do you think I made the right decision? Would you have approached any of the steps differently? And do you think it is equally important to include the client in the decision-making process as I did in this situation? Thanks for watching.